All right, everyone, welcome to the screencast on the Coase theorem. The Coase theorem is something that is sort of near and dear to my heart. It was upon seeing the Coase theorem explained to me and really understanding what it was that I really got excited about economics and the power of economics models and economic thinking. And it was one of the guideposts on my path to becoming an economist. So I hope this one will excite you a little bit, maybe not as much as it excited me. But this is Ronald Coase here. He won the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences in 1991, partly for his work on the Coase theorem, but also for his work on something called the nature of the firm, and also on something called the theory of social cost. The theory of social cost is actually the paper that the Coase theorem comes from. All right. So what is the Coase theorem? Well, stated simply, it is that in the absence of transactions cost, the allocation of resources will be independent of the assignment of property rights. Okay, so what do we mean by transactions cost? So transactions costs here are any cost that is associated with enacting a transaction. So an example I use a lot is if I have my bike and I'm going to sell you my bike for $500, you give me the $500, I value that more than my bike. You value the bike more than the $500, I give you the bike. So therefore, we have had an exchange. So transactions cost are not the $500, and they're not the cost that it cost me to buy or to manufacture the bike. All right. The transactions cost would be if there was any cost to actually going forth with that transaction. So if there were any bargaining costs that we encountered, if there were any sort of negotiation cost, if we had to draw up contracts, if we had to have lawyers, any sort of cost that facilitate the transaction itself, those are what we mean by transactions costs. You can also think of it sometimes as just overhead in a way to the transaction. So the absence of those sorts of transactions costs, the allocation of resources, so who ends up with what at the end, is independent of the assignment of property rights, meaning that it doesn't really matter at the end of the day who owns the thing at the beginning, because as long as we can bargain, the end result will be the same. And it's kind of a counterintuitive sort of result. In fact, when Coase first started proposing what has now become known as the Coase theorem, all the faculty at the University of Chicago told him he was wrong. And there's a famous story, I don't know if it's true or not, where some of the older faculty at Chicago took Coase into a room to try to straighten him out. And over the course of the seminar, Coase convinced them all, and they came out insisting that, of course, the Coase theorem was just obvious. Of course, anyone would see it. So it takes a couple times of looking at it. So it's good that this is a screencast. You can back this up and watch it a couple times. Okay, so let me show you an example of the Coase theorem. All right. So we're going to have two states of the world. We're going to have three. We're going to have a state of the world where there are no property rights. Then we're going to have a state of the world called Doglandia, where dog owners have the right to own dogs. All right. And then we're going to have a state of the world called Quiet World, where people have the right to quiet. All right. And if dogs are infringing upon that, they can have the police get rid of your dog. All right. In Doglandia, they have the right to have the dog, and if the dog is barking or being loud or whatever, it doesn't matter. All right. So three different sets of property rights. One, there's no property right. One where there's property rights is with dog owners, and the third is where property rights are with people who want no barking. They want quiet. All right. So here's how we're going to set up this thought experiment. So first we have someone named, so this is Dick, Jane, and Spot, the classic characters from little kids' books. So Dick values Spot, his dog, at $5,000. All right. That's his, what we call money metric utility. So we took his utility for having Spot, and through a brain scan or whatever, we know that he actually values Spot at $5,000. All right. Jane values silence or quiet at $1,000. All right. So that's the setup for this thought experiment. So first, let's look at this world of no property rights. So what happens in a world of no property rights? If Dick has Spot, who barks a lot, he values Spot at $5,000. Jane values silence at $1,000. What will happen in a world of no property rights? Well, as we've said a couple times before, who knows what will happen, right? without the property rights, can Jane just come and take Spot and kidnap him legally? Does Dick get to let Spot bark all he wants? Who knows what will happen, because the property rights are not well defined. All right. In a way, it means there will be very high transactions costs when property rights are not well defined. All right. So let's now look at two worlds where property rights are well defined. All right. In the first one, it's Doglandia. All right. So what's going to happen if Dick has the right to have Spot? There's nothing Jane can do about it legally to prevent him from having the dog. Even if the dog barks and bothers her, it doesn't matter. She can't do anything about it. All right. What will happen in that world? All right. Well, Dick gets to keep Spot, his dog. All right. And Jane will suffer harm of $1,000. Spot is a yappy, loud dog in this story. All right. So the outcome is the same. We gave the property right to Dick. He has the right to have Spot. And the outcome is that he gets to keep Spot, and Jane is harmed $1,000. All right. What happens in Quiet World? All right. Well, what happens in Quiet World is interesting. What we would imagine is that if Jane now has the right to have silence, but Dick values having Spot more than she values the silence, well, maybe he'll approach her and say, "Hey, Jane, I know you value your silence at $1,000. Let me give you $1,001 if you'll let me keep Spot. I've compensated you for your loss, and I get to keep the dog, who I value more than the $1,001. Jane might counter and say, "Well, Dick, you value Spot at $5,000. I have the property right here. Why don't you give me $4,999? All right. Then I'll be happy, and you'll get to keep Spot, and you'll be happy." All right. So what we know is that somewhere within that interval of 1,001 to 4,999, Dick will pay Jane somewhere between there. They'll have to bargain over it, and it depends on their relative bargaining ability or whatever it is. But there is a huge range of values at which Dick would pay Jane. She gets compensated for her silence being violated, and he gets to keep Spot. All right. So notice that he keeps Spot. Jane is then given the payment of between 1,001 and 4,999. Notice the outcome here is the same in terms of the thing causing the disagreement between them. He gets to keep Spot. All right. So the thing causing the disagreement, that stays the same. Dick keeps Spot. So the outcome of the thing causing disagreement is the same. Dick keeps Spot, no matter who we give the property right to. In one, we gave the property right to Dick. In the other, we gave the property right to Jane. And it didn't end up mattering in terms of the thing that was causing the disagreement between them. All right. So now let's look at the opposite case, where their values are opposite of one another. So here, Dick is going to value Spot at $1,000, and Jane is going to value her silence at $5,000. All right. So again, we start in the world of no property rights. Who knows what will happen? It's hard for them to negotiate in a world of no property rights. The transactions costs are too high. The bargaining costs are too high. If Jane tries to compensate Dick, if Dick tries to compensate Jane, whatever it is, who's to say that you have to be bound by that? Because there's no property rights in place to establish who gets to do what. All right. So again, let's look at this world of Doglandia. In Doglandia, Spot's gone. Dick accepts between 1,001 and 4,099 from Jane to get rid of Spot. He only values Spot at $1,000. Jane values her silence at $5,000. There's some number between 1,001 and 4,099 that Jane will give Dick, and he will get rid of Spot. All right, because she values her silence more than he values Spot. All right. What happens with Jane? Well, she gets her quiet. All right. Jane gets her quiet, and she pays Dick between 1,001 and 4,999. What if we gave the property right instead to Jane again? All right. Well, again, Spot is gone, and Dick is harmed $1,000. Jane just picks up the phone. She calls the authorities and say, "Look, this is Quiet World. I have the property right here. His dog is always barking. He's got to get rid of it." And they come and they take away Spot because he is loud and violating her quiet. All right. Jane gets her quiet. Notice, in terms of the thing that they had the disagreement about, the outcome is the same. It doesn't matter who we give the property right to. The outcome in terms of the thing over which they're disagreeing is the same. All right. So that's what the Coase theorem means. In the presence of low transactions cost, low bargaining cost, the outcome is the same. It doesn't matter who you give the property right to. Okay. Now, there's a few things to notice here about the Coase theorem. The first is that income effects do matter. So notice Jane and Dick are not indifferent between these outcomes. All right. When Jane has the property right, she prefers that state of the world. When we say the outcome is the same, we're talking about in terms of this thing they have the disagreement over. That's what ends up being the same. They do care about who gets the initial assignment of property rights. That person ends up better off than the other. But the outcome, the Pareto efficiency of the situation is the same. All right. So also notice that this is a reciprocal problem. If both Dick and Jane liked dogs and didn't mind dogs barking, there is no issue here. All right. So just because the dog's barking doesn't mean there's an issue. The problem is if the dog is barking and one wants the dog and one wants the silence. So many problems have this state of the world where if me burning tires in my yard didn't bother my neighbors, if they love tire smoke, then there would be no real issue. It's because my neighbors probably don't like me burning tires in my yard that there becomes an issue over who gets the property right. Do I have the property right to burn tires in my yard, or do they have the property right not to have black smoke funneling in through their house? All right. The point is, it takes two to have two different preferences in order for there to be a real issue with these sorts of goods. All right. The last thing I want to say about the Coase theorem is that it's the transactions cost that actually cause an issue. All right. This is one of the big implications of the Coase theorem. Inefficiency is not caused by what we will call an externality. So the dog barking is an externality. Me burning tires in my yard and having the smoke go through my neighbor's yard is an externality. It's a third-party effect. Inefficiency is not caused by those things, but it's caused by the presence of bargaining costs, the transactions cost. If there are no transactions costs, then people can bargain to an efficient solution. All right. Now, it'll be a different Pareto efficient solution depending on who we give the property right to. Again, go back and look at those 6 states of the world that we did earlier in the screencast. They do care about which of those Pareto optimal states of the world they're in, but in terms of the society's efficiency, does the society get to a Pareto efficient outcome? It's the same no matter who we give the property right to. All right. The last thing, I said the last thing before, but this really is the last thing we'll talk about in terms of the Coase theorem, is that the size of the group that is bargaining can really matter. All right. The examples I did were 2 people, Dick and Jane. All right. That's a small group. All right. Transactions costs are small when you have only a few people bargaining over the outcome. So if 2 neighbors have a problem with a dog going across and using the bathroom in the other's yard, they can probably come up with negotiating a solution that works no matter who we give the property right to, right? Those transactions costs are really low, all right? So often resources can be allocated when the numbers are small without much government involvement because the parties can bargain, all right? When numbers are very large, say that a steel mill is located on a river and thousands and thousands of people live downstream from that steel mill, then it's probably going to be very difficult for them to negotiate any sort of solution. The transactions costs are really, really high there, all right? So often the resource allocation will depend on the assignment of property rights, all right? Whoever gets the property right will end up being the one that can enforce what they want, and often this involves government involvement in negotiating solutions between the different groups. Okay, so that's the end of the short screencast on the Coase theorem. I'll see you at the next screencast.